So, David, what do we learn from this case about cybersecurity and crimes?
Well, what I'm learning is that it's really complicated. The cross-border nature of it means it's incredibly difficult to enforce. It's not just about the money, but there's reputational damage, there's embarrassment for governments, embarrassment for people. It's really broad and wide scale. There's very little risk for the people that are actually going out and committing these crimes, and the cost to them is very, very little, so they can just spam these things out there and still make a really significant amount of money. So in this case, they failed the vast majority of the time, but they still walked away with $81 million. Like in a normal bank heist, that'd be like the biggest bank heist of all time.
Sure.
One thing that I don't completely understand is what are some of the failures that allowed this to happen in the first place? Like, how does this even happen? How do you lose $81 million?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about this is, when we think about cyber crimes, so frequently, obviously, there's a technological component. Advances in technology will kind of create more opportunities or different methods in which to steal money, or as we're going to look later, to steal data. But if we think about this Bangladeshi bank heist situation, it's really interesting because it wasn't just about the technology. It was a confluence of different factors because there's people involved, there were processes that failed, there was old equipment that should have been updated that wasn't. And so a confluence of these things actually led to this really significant outcome. And so I think in a lot of situations, if companies, banks, and governments do a lot of the basics of security, making sure you have good antivirus software, making sure you're trying to filter out as much malware and viruses as possible, making sure you're using firewalls. I mean, these are things that weren't actually happening in this Bangladeshi bank case situation. Making sure that you're having updated equipment, making sure that your people understand the processes. So, for example, after this happened with the Bangladeshi bank, SWIFT and the New York Fed put out kind of announcements about, hey, to be aware of this. And so when subsequent attacks or attempts happen, like in places like Vietnam and Ecuador, they were actually able to stop that from occurring, even though they were trying to, again, manipulate SWIFT transmission codes and things.
So I guess the takeaway is, on the one hand, it's kind of amazing that we've gotten to the point as society where with the push of a button, money is flying around the world. This probably happens millions upon millions of times every single day, right? And so on the one hand, although we're focusing on the negative side of it, it's actually pretty amazing that governments, even in developing countries, say Bangladesh, they're able to bank with the New York Fed or transfer money all over the world. And most of the time that works out for the benefit of everybody, right? But the flip side is, we also have to be cognizant of the challenges and making sure we're staying ahead of these things. Because obviously, one of the big things is that we've talked about a lot in this course is that the law and punishments are often retroactive and reactionary, and they're not really able to stay ahead of these problems. So I assume we're going to keep seeing, some aspects of these things going forward.
We'll always be, unfortunately, we'll always be responding to the last crime or last situation. And that also maybe means, unfortunately, we may not be able to react effectively to the last situation either, as it takes time to put in good policy, as it takes time to get everybody kind of on board, kind of to the point that you raised earlier about the difficulty of enforcement. If these are transnational crimes, you have to get multiple jurisdictions involved to kind of police together.
It actually reminds me of, have you seen the movie Catch Me If You Can, the Steven Spielberg movie?
Yeah.
So Frank,
great movie.
Yeah, Frank Abagnale is one of, considered one of the greatest fraudsters of all time, right? And so recently, within the last few years, he spoke at Google, and it was a really widely watched video where he was giving a speech about his life, and it was so compelling and really interesting. And one of the questions at the end that kind of struck me was, somebody from Google asked him, do you think you could have been successful as a fraudster today, given all the advancements of security and technology? And his response, quite famously, was, it's easier to be a fraudster today than ever before. And he said that he would have made so much more money had he, tried to commit fraud, in this day and age than it was at the time. So I think it's kind of interesting. As technology is advancing, more good things are happening, but it also widens the door for people to abuse the system.
Exactly.